Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors, experts in the biggest questions in tech. This is Making Revenue Tick. Hello and welcome to Making Revenue Tick. I'm joined by Brent Holloway. Brent, how are you?
Hey, Richard. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. Do you know what, Brent? We had a conversation because we were introduced by someone that we had on the podcast who was one of my all-time favorite guests, which is Jelena Tarbak. And you've worked with Jelena, right? What's your relationship?
Yeah, I was fortunate to have Jelena on my team, and we worked together at Talend for several years. She was really impressive. She did a great job, grew in her role from a frontline leader to a second-line leader, and one of my best hires ever. Really enjoyed working with her.
Yeah, well, epic. I mean, she's one of our favorite guests ever. So the fact that she was on your team and you saw that potential and then she's had that incredible career afterwards. I mean, that's literally what this podcast is all about. So I know that, and then when we first spoke, it was like one of those conversations where I just felt like we'd known each other for years. Because
I felt the same way. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad. And otherwise it would just be me on my own going, I was really excited. and one of the things was that you're building something that I've never seen in the market. You're talking about a topic around ICP and around how to really understand that, but in a way that I've not seen anyone else get into that level of detail or solve through technology. It seems to be like a sort of dark art that people bring in terms of their experience. But I think the way that you're solving this problem is fascinating. I can't wait to share it with the audience today, because I know that if you think about the type of people that are probably listening to this podcast, I would imagine it's sort of pre-seed founders all the way through to series kind of BC. Maybe it's the executives, maybe it's the revenue leaders, maybe it's just some individual contributors that just really want to excel in their careers. But everyone's trying to solve those sets of growth stage challenges. And I know that when we were first having that conversation, we brought up a topic, which was Moneyball. And the idea that maybe what you're doing is a bit like a Moneyball GTM. And I just wanted to know, what does Moneyball GTM mean to you?
Sure. Yeah, and there's some overlapping concepts there. So the term Moneyball, it started from the real world story about Major League Baseball in the US and these analysts figuring out how to get the highest return per dollar invested, right? Like thinking about data in a new way. It's not just batting average. That was a KPI that's been around forever, but on base percentage as an example is a really important KPI. And so really using data to be more efficient. So at HP, now this goes back a little over 10 years ago, but we had really robust sales operations teams that would help us analyze data in unique ways to figure out what were the plays that could be run. So we called them Moneyball plays, based on the movie. And it was all about where were we likely to get the highest return on our time? What combination of products and positioning to what audiences, what account characteristics would most likely produce really great returns? So, I had already done elements of that at previous companies, working with sales operations to figure out what were the ideal customer profiles, the characteristics that produce the best outcomes. And I think Moneyball at HP just really took it to the next level. And then in subsequent companies, smaller, startups and scale ups, we didn't have the luxury of these big, robust sales ops teams, at least not right away. So a lot of times the sales leaders, myself included, we'd dig into the data, roll our sleeves up and try to replicate what we had done at HP. But that was the concept. Moneyball, I think, is a great concept. And that's, as you know, in the platform that we're building is trying to make it easy for businesses to be able to run those types of plays, even if they don't have a large sales ops team internally.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely get into like the what, the why, the nuts, the bolts, and how you're solving it, because I think it's fascinating. I guess what I'd love to understand is about this topic, right? So if we're talking about really helping startups to be successful, the whole love of rev operations, the whole just love of simplifying the complexity. What is it about this challenge that you love?
Yeah, I'm really passionate about like unit economics. To me, it boils down to the basics of how many opportunities does a sales rep need to work at what win rate, at what average sales price, over what length of time, right? Those are the big four key elements. And from there, you can start to quantify what's realistic? Like how much can this AE book on average? And is that enough to produce the return that the business needs? And what I often see is that companies, especially as they're scaling, they don't really think about the unit economics, and they spend a lot of time running plays or sales scenarios that just don't have repeatable unit economics to produce the outcomes that the business needs to achieve. And so I'll give you a brief example. You've got a rep working 10 opportunities at any given time, and he or she has a 20% win rate, and it's a $20,000 deal. So 10 opportunities worked, 20% win rate, that's 2 wins at a $20,000 ASP. That's $40,000 every X number of days. Let's say it's 90 days, like that's a quarter, just for easy math. Well, $40,000 every quarter is not very good, right? That's $160,000 per year. Maybe that was good in year 1 or even year 2 of a founder-led sales scenario. But that's what I see happening quite a bit, is transitioning from founder-led sales. They got some level of product market fit. They start hiring salespeople, and they need to figure out what are the scenarios where this person can book 600,000 or more, not the 150 that the founders were doing. So they have to really think differently about the unit economics to produce the outcomes that the business needs.
Yeah. It makes me think of that classic thing about the art and science of sales.
Yep.
Because there's so many times that I've met sales trainers and they're just like pure artists. They can do magical things, and you watch them and you're just in awe. It's like watching a show, and they can kind of magic their way through scenarios, and they try and teach that to others. And they might be able to get people to do a couple of role plays in a scenario, but then as soon as that person leaves and the business just tries to implement it, they all go back to type, because they haven't systemized it. It was like too artistic. It was too based on their personality and their charisma, rather than here's a system of how we can do those things. Let alone if you like kind of take up a level and say, where is your territory? Where should you be focusing on? Who are your accounts? How is your messaging tailored for those accounts? And when we talk about like this concept of the artist versus the scientist view of what it takes to lead sales teams and scale startups, like what comes to your mind?
Yeah, I love that. I think both are extremely important. I'm probably, frankly, over-rotated towards the science part of the equation, but certainly you need to be able to present well and have all the soft skills as well to be efficient in sales. But I found that quite a bit of the time, people don't take enough effort to really dig into the science part of the equation. But certainly both are important. I would encourage your listeners to not overinvest in one or the other, but certainly both.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if scientists are helping artists choose like where they should spend their time, then artists can just do what they do and be creative and make magic happen, because they don't want to be spending time trying to figure out like, where should I be focusing my time? They want to go, in that scenario, I can go and pull it out of the bag. And I think that what you've built is about helping people to go, right, this is where you can play to your strengths the most. Now go free and have fun, and you're going to be successful.
Well, let me give you a quick example there. So one of my clients does a great job with positioning and differentiating, and they were really honing in on a very specific vertical, almost like a vertical within a vertical. And they had most of their customers there. So at first glance, you could say it must be a great vertical. That's where most of our customers are. That's where most of our revenue is. But when you looked at it from the lens of how much effort that we put into that very specific vertical to get those results, it was actually quite inefficient. So they were doing great on the arts part of it, but not so great on the science part of it. So we're encouraging them to shift their efforts in some other areas where they get a higher return on their time.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, cool. I would imagine that some people who might be listening to this, Brent, will be thinking, well, obviously, you are someone who managed to find Yelena, which obviously gives you some credibility if they've watched that episode, but they might not know much about your story. And I think it will help to position you as an expert in this space, which I certainly see that you are, by sharing a bit about who you are and the types of businesses that you've made a career out of helping.
Sure. Yeah. I was fortunate to get into tech shortly after graduating from UC Santa Barbara with a biology degree of all things. A lot of people, especially back then, we didn't have many sales courses, and being in the Bay Area, I was fortunate to know an angel investor in a small startup called Blue Pumpkin Software. So Bob Carr, thank you so much for that. That was my start. And I was a BDR. So like I was in the Palo Alto office at 6 a.m, hammering the phones and setting meetings. Was fortunate to get promoted into a quota carrying role before long. Did some work as a channel manager. And then I always had a burning desire to be a leader and to build teams and grow teams. So yeah, around 30, I guess, I got my first management position, and 20 years in leadership since, mostly at startups and scale-ups, with the exception of that 3-year run at HP Enterprise Software. And then Talend was really probably the highlight of my career. It was a 7-year run. My team grew from 5 reps to 52 reps over that time period. We went from about 2 million to 70 million in ARR, hired some really great people like Yelena and others. And it was a really good time.
Well, that's not a bad track record. And what are you doing now?
Yeah. So, well, going back to Talend just for a second, we had an IPO in 2016, and then we went private by way of Thoma Bravo in 21. And then I worked for a unicorn in San Francisco, disrupting the DevOps space called Harness, really great company. And then that was about a 2-year run. For a little over a year now, I've been leading my own little go-to-market advisory business. And I'm fortunate to have 4 clients. I really enjoy what I do. But with that said, I figured what I really want to do is double down on this ICP platform business. So it's software and a service. And I think we're onto something here. So that's where I'm really going to invest more of my time this year, is to see if we can build a real business around it.
I have zero doubt. Doubt. I've seen it.
I appreciate your confidence.
Yeah. What we're not going to do, listeners on this call, is not going to like share screens and show you like the real detail of how it works. But I'm sure that if you really love what you see on this podcast, then you can obviously reach out to Brent and he'll be able to show you how you could utilize this. But it is incredible. So let's talk about the problem, right? So if we talk about all of that experience that you've had, where you've worked in startups, you've worked in scale ups. Yeah, I know you sort of minimized it, but you've spent 3 years in massive enterprise too. So you really have seen the full range of what technology sales teams need to look like and how they can grow. What are the consistent problems that you've seen in all of those businesses?
So the consistent problem is how do I grow fast? And then depending on the stage of the business, how do I grow efficiently at the same time? Especially over the last couple of years, right? But before that, when VC money was easier to raise, it was less about efficiency and more just about top line growth. But even then, there was, you had to keep an eye on efficient growth. But now, especially, right, the word efficiency is just so much more prevalent now, and it's a hard thing to do. Like, how do I double sales? I don't get the luxury of doubling my sales team, but I got to double sales. Maybe I get 20% increase in headcount, 30% increase in headcount, but the rest needs to come by way of productivity. So that's the challenge. How do I take a team that was selling $350,000 per AE last year to $500,000 per AE this year, while also hiring new people and retaining my top performers? Like it's a really tough challenge for revenue leaders to do all these things well at the same time.
And they don't get much time.
No.
So the average tenure of a CRO is 17 months.
Isn't that sad? Yeah.
Which is incredibly low. And I think there is a huge amount. I see it because I'm on the talent side of that problem, right? So people come to me and say, hey, can you go and find us this unicorn who can do X, Y, Z, count to 3, with their eyes closed while spinning around on a pogo stick. Like they expect like this person to bring magic. But what I loved about what you're building is that you've bought this way of giving businesses visibility to go and make more calculated bets. And you've talked about, de-risking things. You talked about doing it profitably, efficiently. What are some of the ways that you've seen that people do it wrong? So they aren't efficient, they go slow, and they burn runway. Yeah,
I would say those that are less efficient are more likely to just be winging it. They have a very rough idea of how they should focus their resources, but they haven't been very data-driven with their approach. That could be in terms of like how many people do they assign to the enterprise part of the market or the SMB part of the market. It could be what industries that we go after. And if you're just winging it, you're highly likely to be, falling into a lot of scenarios that are inefficient. And so again, our encouragement is to do some data. We've got a platform for it, but you can do it with Excel spreadsheets to some degree and pivot tables. But yeah, I would encourage people to be, a little more data driven into what are the scenarios. We call it ICP. It could also be thought about as sales scenarios. There's a lot of overlap there, but it's what are the conditions that are repeatable with a level of statistical significance, so that you do have some predictability in whether or not if I invest X amount of dollars or Y number of people into this play or this segment, I'm likely to get this outcome. There's still risk, of course, right? You're never going to eliminate risk, but if you can reduce that risk and have a higher probability of getting, $500,000 for an SMB rep that was previously doing 250 or 300, you really make a big difference on the business.
And the rep, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's what a difference to make quota and feel. I mean, I've seen a lot of people go from just like stressed, pulling their hair out, not enjoying life, at the risk of being fired for poor performance to thriving. And, of course, make more money. I've seen a lot of people buy their first house once they got their first successful year or two under their belt. So yeah, that's really rewarding to see that happen.
Yeah, because it's the problem, right? I see new data coming out all the time, but I think the latest data I saw was that 74% of reps missed quota last year.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, even at good companies. Isn't that amazing? Like really good companies, when you really dig in, you'd be surprised at, a quarter of the reps making quota.
So when you see numbers like that there's such a small percentage of people and companies that are actually achieving the goals that they've set, which they've got budgets against and shareholders, expectations and all that sort of stuff attached to it, and investors. Why do you believe it's so significantly not going the way that businesses want it to go?
Yeah. I mean, in short, I think it's because growth is still more valued than profitability or efficiency. So efficiency is more prevalent than it was years ago. But with that said, like if you look at the impact on valuations for businesses, it's more determined by growth. And so if you have to hire too many salespeople to get that extra little bit of growth, even though that the consequence of that is fewer reps making quota, that might still be a net positive at the business level. So I think that's probably the biggest underlying root cause is the need for growth, top line revenue growth.
For sure. And I think the reaction, I see it all the time, is right. I've got lots of friends who are in revenue leadership roles, many are through the podcast, many through my network. And when they're missing quota, and maybe they slipped a forecast, maybe that's 2 quarters, 3 quarters in a row, the pressure really starts to mount, and ultimately they are fearing for their jobs. Maybe they've had some churn in their team. And often the reaction is just more activity. Right, we have to. What are the KPIs showing us? And it goes back to like quite an old school mentality around: are you making the dials? Are you going and meeting enough people? And it's just like, how fast are we driving this car without really people going, right, let's stop. Are we on the right road?
Right.
Are we going in the right way? If we just keep going faster, are we just going to get further and further and further away? I don't think people really stop and think. So I just wonder, the way that you think about solving this problem, what are some of the things that come to mind when you think about when a business is maybe missing target right now? So let's say rather than they're designing this perfect machine from the ground up, how they want it to be, they're actually going, right, we are actually missing right now. We're one of those people missing quota.
Yeah.
When they stop and reconsider, what are some of the things that you encourage them to look at?
Yeah. Well, first of all, hopefully you had a good plan with unit economics that led to your desired outcomes, your business plan. And then you can run a regression. You can go back and say, well, we assumed that we would have this many leads at this ASP and this conversion rate. If we're missing, where did we miss? Right. So then you can be really tailored and targeted about how you go about improving going forward. So for businesses that don't, I would recommend start with a waterfall plan. A couple of my companies, we called it Road to Club. So it's basically the waterfall math at the rep level and at the team level that would lead to the desired outcomes. And so you could see, again, map actuals versus plan in each of those important KPIs. We called it Road to Club because on average, those that made the Road to Club metrics were very likely to actually go to President's Club. So it was highly correlated to success. But to your point earlier, like sometimes you do need to row harder. That's rarely the answer in and of itself, but sometimes, if your AEs are producing only 10% of their own pipeline, that's probably bad. More than 50%, that's probably bad too. Although I've had a lot of that was one of the KPIs that we would measure is how much of your bookings were you able to self-source. And usually the top reps were at least a third, if not half. But if you get too reliant on that, then you get the other challenge, which is, you maybe heard the term the $300,000 BDR, which is if you don't have BDRs, a lot of companies in their efficiency squeeze were reducing the number of BDRs that the AEs would have, and these senior AEs with 300K OTEs, if they didn't have any inbound or BDR support, they were their own BDR as well. And I think that can be a problem as well. But anyway, going back to your question, yeah, I'd recommend having a relatively simple plan and then measure against it on a monthly basis to see where you're achieving or not achieving, and then make adjustments accordingly.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. What else is the problem? So let's get really clear on. Let's say that I'm a founder or an executive within a startup today, and I'm listening to this podcast and I'm going, I definitely want to scale fast, and I definitely want that to be efficient, and I would love to know what map we should be following and some nice metrics that we can use to go and measure our results against these bets that we're taking.
Yeah.
What other problems would you expect that I would be facing?
Well, what happens you can make anything look good in a spreadsheet, right? So you have to be realistic about the amount of time that it takes to get to better unit economics and bigger outcomes. And then where I see some challenges at times is very aggressive assumptions over, let's say, 3 to 6 months for something that realistically is going to take 9 to 12 months or more to get to some level of efficiency or productivity. So yes, there's a leap of faith. Like you don't have enough historical data to build a perfect plan. But if you're putting assumptions into your plan, I actually saw a business plan recently that was like, I said, this is a great plan if you were able to achieve it, but literally you'd be in like the top 1/10 of 1% if you were able to execute on this plan. So it's just too aggressive. But of course, everybody wants the big outcome. They want to build an aggressive plan, but I don't know. It's got to be based on reality. Hopefully, you have at least some historical data points from which to scale. Like, go ahead and assume some level of incremental improvement. Although, if you're going from founder-led sales to your first sales team, you might take a dip for a while. Those new salespeople that you hire, even if they're more experienced in selling than the founder, they don't have the passion and the experience of selling it for the last couple of years. So you might actually have to build in a dip in productivity per rep for a while. So.
Yeah, which I don't think many do, because it's very easy to just drag that spreadsheet to the right. Look what our revenue attainment is going to be, and at our current average deal size and at our current average sales cycle, if we just go and open a mirror, then look how much revenue we could go and make, and it's just not the way.
That's right.
So. Let's say that people are winging it today, and what do you really mean by that?
Winging it is we chase all opportunities roughly equally, regardless of the industry or the use case or all of these other things that you could really start to measure. And when you're doing outbound, like inbound, you have less control, although to some degree you can influence who comes inbound. But from an outbound perspective, you want to be as targeted as possible, right? You can control the account size, the industry, whether or not they have intent signals. There's so many filters you can put into your ABM and your outbound campaigns, if you choose to, that you can really make a big difference. And I just see so many companies just like very broad ICP definition, and then you're essentially swinging at everything. And there's always a bell curve in terms of distribution of where you're efficient and inefficient. What if you could minimize the time spent on the bottom half and put more of that into the top half? You can get a huge swing. I've seen it happen. Reps going from $250,000, $300,000 in annualized bookings to 500, 600 in 12 to 18 months when you start to apply time, energy, and focus on the right types of accounts.
I love it. Could you give a specific example of where you've seen that come true?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it at multiple companies. Just a couple of years ago, we had a scenario where took over a team that was struggling, and they were to some degree swinging at everything. On some of the forecast calls early on, you could start to feel like a POV discussion for an $8,000 opportunity and lots of next steps, and you're thinking, I need to show this person, the sales productivity formula and map out for them why you just can't do it. I mean, some people have it instinctively; other people need to see it in black and white. Why you just, you can't work too many $8,000 deals that require a POV and a lot of effort. You're never going to get to your $150,000 or $200,000 quota per quarter.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, and I've seen different variations of that scenario many times, and it's really fun to help people again on the science part of the equation to see, based on historical results, when we do this, we get this outcome. Let's assume that's good. But when you do that, and that could be little deals, industries where we don't have as good product market fit, you get these much lower outcomes. And so I've found that when you can actually show the data, people really believe in the guidance that much more, and they'll be more likely to change their behavior, which is ultimately what it's about, right? It's getting them to change what they're doing on a daily basis to get the better opportunities in their forecast.
And let's say that someone's listening to this and they're maybe not the executive, maybe they're an IC, or maybe they're a frontline sales manager, and they want to win that battle and have that conversation inside their business. How could they approach that to be able to get the executive buy-in that we need to change the behaviors and way we're measuring the team?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, frontline manager overseeing a small team in a region, they can still apply these same concepts. To some degree, they could do it themselves if they're data driven. Perhaps they have a sales operations resource that they can partner with to really dig into the data to see what's working best for their team. And I'm glad you brought this up, actually, because another problem that I see is when companies have a one size fits all understanding of their ICP, and it never is, right? The ICP characteristics for enterprise are often very different than for mid-market or for SMB, or even for the same role in different regions. The industries and the scenarios where we have efficient sales cycles in the US might be very different than France versus the UK and so on. So you have to be really granular about it. I would recommend quantifying your ideal customer profile characteristics down to each role. It's probably not very different for the SMB rep covering New York versus Florida, although even there you might have different, more certain industries are more prevalent in one region or another. But certainly at the role level, you want to really get granular about what good looks like. And going back to your question about the frontline manager, work with sales ops or even do it yourself. Take a data-driven approach. What works consistently? What's inefficient? And let's double down on the scenarios where we get the best return on our time.
And let's say it's the other way around. Let's say it's a founder listening to this and they want to go and get their sales team to really buy into this because they want to drive change. Yeah. But they might have sales that are stuck at type. They're just doing what they're trying to do and do the best that they can do. How could a founder think about solving this problem and getting that behavior change in their team?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you would hope that if they bring data to the presentation and the table, that the reps would be thankful for those insights, so that they can ultimately make more money. Right? Their interests are aligned. That they should change behavior to do what's more efficient. And if they don't, they're probably not a right fit for the business. Right? I'd give them an opportunity to adapt. Might need to be reinforced a couple times, but not for long. Right? If you get people that don't follow the guidance from the executives in terms of where you need them focused, then they're probably not the right fit for the business.
I think it's a great point. That conversation right around this whole businesses have different stages and people are meant for different stages. You've grown through various levels and it takes a really special type of character to be able to adapt and grow to be good at what the role requires you to be good at as the business needs change and as they get more process driven and more data driven and things get bigger and there's more territories and there's more complexity. A lot of people don't like that. So let's say the sales manager who takes you from 3 to 10 million might not be the same sales manager with a skill set to take you from 10 to 30 and 30 to 50 and 50 to 100 or however you see those stages. And I think a lot of this is, if you are a founder, I'd love to get your take on this. My view on this is, if you're a founder and you're really going, right, we really want to grow, think about, rather than maybe the 10-year, 5-year goal, is what is our actual growth phase that we're in now? And do we have people who have lived through that phase in other businesses? Yeah. We have a sales leader that knows what's coming, knows what icebergs we've got coming ahead, knows how when we start splitting territories and going maybe after EMEA, or we launch new products and we add complexity to what we sell. So rather than it being this laser focused single ICP that we just try and go nationally with, we'd suddenly create this potential mess of things that and so many bets that we're trying to make at one time that it just gets really complicated. And I would just really love to hear, when I'm talking about that, like people's fit to stages, what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think that's very true. Some people obviously can. Chris Degnan from Snowflake took it from first rep to where they are today. I think he actually just stepped down from Snowflake, but absolutely incredible run. But that's kind of a unicorn situation. Yeah, for early stage, I'd be looking for characteristics like have they built the playbook? Do they like building the playbook? Do they like getting involved in deals versus later stage they're more likely to accelerate playbook that's already been written, and they do more strategic work, but they don't get involved as much in individual opportunities and frontline coaching. So yeah, I do think there's different skill sets, and not just the skill set, but what do they want to be doing, right? If you're an early stage person, you need and we're talking about like, let's say a first revenue leader, somebody that can actually do the deals and not just hire people and do the strategic work at the top, but actually get involved in deals. Not to say that revenue leaders at bigger companies don't also get involved in deals. Certainly they do, but maybe not to the same degree.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of the time people have a negative experience of businesses becoming more scale up focused because they do add more process. And it's like seen as like, it's more bureaucracy, it's more red tape. Process gets in the way of us selling. Process makes it more complicated for buyers. And I think there is a bunch of that where businesses are trying to build stuff because they think it's the right thing to do. And then they go, actually, that really slowed us down. And our best people didn't like it. But the way that you're thinking about this, which is not like we're just building process for process sake. It's like this data is going to help us to make less mistakes, de-risk our big investments, and help our most valuable resources, which is our team, to go and be much more successful. So you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of as businesses grow, that complexity grows and things that they get right. What are some of the things that have been real highlights for you in your career around scaling businesses successfully? Just what are some of those highlights?
So I feel like I've been really fortunate to work with some great recruiters. It wasn't always linear. Like there was times I can remember at Talend where perhaps it was because of a round of funding or perhaps shortly after the IPO that we had to scale faster, right? You take this investment, whether it's a VC investment or, a private, going private and the cash that you raise from that, there's growth expectations. And so I was fortunate to work with some great recruiters. We had internal programs for referrals. We found that referrals were the best in terms of like the results that we got from the people that came by way of referrals, the longevity of people that came by way of referrals. And it wasn't, so yeah, I think just as a kind of a takeaway there, I would recommend if you don't already have one, an internal referral program, because the few $1,000s or whatever you might offer as a bonus there is like relatively inexpensive. With that said, both internal and external recruiters, they did a great job to help us scale quickly. And it's hard, right? It's one thing when you're hiring one or two people, you can be very selective. You can invest a lot of time in it. But if you're a sales leader that has to hire 10 people in the next 2 months while balancing aggressive growth goals and helping your existing team, it's really, really hard. And in that scenario, if you don't have great recruiters, you're going to struggle. You're going to take your eye off the ball from all the other things that you need to do. So a lot of appreciation for what people like you do, Richard.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I've definitely tried to systemize a lot of this because it is this thing that a lot of people wing it, I mean, in sales, you talked about winging it. There's a lot more process and a lot more effort that goes into the inputs that drive the outputs in sales than there is in hiring. If I hear one more person say they want me to find them an A player rock star, and then I ask them what that means, I think I might go crazy. So absolutely, I think that getting the people right is so fundamental. And there is ways of systemizing that to go and de-risk it from both sides, because like why I believe that A player is this silly saying is because it's like saying there's a group of A players and then everyone else is B's and C's. But if you put the right person in the wrong environment, they'll become a B or a C player. If there's not alignment, or maybe it's an enterprise sales cycle and they're a mid-market rep, or it's into a completely different industry, or whatever that looks like. But there aren't people that are successful in every single business. It's just not the
Sure.
case. Particularly if you're scaling, you won't have a whole group of just absolute top multipliers. You've got a varying group of capabilities and skill set. And I think the real job of a great sales leader is, with what I've got, how do I get the absolute most from them? Because they're all different, right? They're human beings at the end of the day. So we're trying to like manage humans in a way that like we manage machines.
Right.
And I still believe that AI won't take over sales just yet. So so when you're hiring for salespeople or sales leaders, maybe we look at those both separately. Like, what are some of the things that you look for that have added up to fantastic people?
Yeah. So a couple things come to mind here. The phrase humble, hungry, and smart comes to mind, right? Some level of humility, hungry. They're motivated for whatever their reasons are. But it's sales is tough. You're going to have a lot of rejection. You're going to have some up and down quarters. Even if you're successful, very few people do it quarter after quarter. So you want to know that there's some underlying motivation, and then smart, right? Like there's some ways to assess, being quick on their feet and being able to, do quantification of math and business cases and those types of things. So humble, hungry, and smart is kind of a framework that I think about. Some level of a track record of success, not necessarily against quota. Of course, that's an obvious one, but relative to their peers. I've seen some scenarios, especially in startups, where you're talking to a candidate that was at 88% of his or her number, but they were the top 1 or 2 out of 12 people on their team. So I think you got to look at it both in terms of percentage of quota and percentage of peer group performance. And then coachability is another big one. So I've hired over 100 people using a fairly specific role play process for later stage candidates. And it's really good for a couple of reasons. You get a rough sense for how they're going to represent themselves in our business in a discovery call. We also do a mock negotiation. So you get a sense for, how are they going to come to a win-win outcome in a fairly uncomfortable situation. It's a high pressure scenario. And then perhaps the best part of that role play is the coachability. So you'll give them some feedback. Are they defensive about it? Do they accept it? You might even give them a tip that they can then apply towards a later part of the role play, so that you can assess coachability. And Mark Roberge, he's one of the guys that I follow. He's got a lot of great talks on YouTube and SaaStr. He talks about having taken a very scientific approach to measuring what are the traits that are most highly correlated with success in sales. And his number one was coachability. And so that really stuck with me. And I think it's spot on. And to some degree, it is measurable. And for your listeners that aren't already, I'd encourage you to really, assess for that. Like if you have a scorecard when you're interviewing candidates, make coachability one of those categories, because it's highly correlated to good outcomes.
You've got to spill the beans on your negotiation role play. What was it? What was that thing that you mentioned to me in the pre-chat that you love to do with candidates?
Yeah, it's really fun. So we do, it's a 3-part, it takes about an hour. The first 5 minutes is them walking me through how they would prepare for an executive level call. So the discovery, it's not a cold call. It's a pre-scheduled mock discovery call. That takes about 20 minutes. You get a sense for the types of questions do they ask? Do they have instincts around double clicking when they hear a pain point? Do they try to quantify value? Do they get some level of the project? But I don't want them to just launch through BANT right away, right? That just sounds like an interrogation rather than a good discovery. But you can learn a lot in 20 minutes of a mock discovery. The negotiation that you just brought up is really fun. So in the role play, we fast forward 2 or 3 months into this fictitious sales cycle, and we say, your list price is $100,000. You've got discretion to go down to $70,000 to get a win, but you're $80,000 away from President's Club. And your boss, who's also on the call, is $85,000 away from his or her quota. I've done a lot of these with Yelena, by the way. So that's the scenario. And then you kick it off by saying, well, your competition, they're about the same. We are very close in the scorecard. They're coming in at 50,000. So Richard, if you can lower your price to 60, I'm a reasonable guy. You can get a win today. How does that sound? Right. So you're kind of teeing up this kind of fun scenario, and people get nervous. They want to get a win. So some people race to $70,000 just to get a win, and other people sell value, and they find some middle ground, and they get a case study and a multi-year term, and all of those types of things. So again, it's an amazing process. I've done it over 100 times, and you can learn a lot in a short period of time, and it's fun. And if you do it right, even the candidate enjoys it, but it is kind of stressful.
Oh, I love that point that you just made there, which is if you do this stuff, because goodness me, the amount of times that I speak to particularly executives, but now it's becoming more at the IC level as people want to de-risk hiring. They want to get this stuff right because they've made mistakes, is they put people through like 6, 7, 8, 9 stage recruitment processes. Yeah. And they're asking people to go and produce like 180-day plans that will never get used. But if you design a good process that's challenging, that tests the old grey matter, that does create some competition, where they do get some feedback, they do get to show the things that they're best at, they come away feeling like they've learned something, that's like the best way to go and get people to go, goodness me, if I can feel this way during a process, what will it be like to work there every day? You know, like you create a buyer experience for prospects as they're like coming through the process of like, you know, buying your technology. It shouldn't feel like once you've bought, then we're going to show you like what we're really like and give you like all the love and put some really good people on this. Like treat them like they're customers from the moment they come in the door. Be a fiduciary, like to quote Jay Abraham. But so many people get that wrong and they just throw tasks at people for the sake of it. But people that have taken that level of care and time to go and work out, well, here's something that really works. Here's a formula. We've done it 100 times.
Yeah.
And we enjoy it.
I love that you're bringing this up. And I can tell you that some of the candidates will say, you know what, I really appreciate the coaching that you just gave me. And I think they mean it sincerely, typically when they bring this up. And a lot of them will tell you, you know what, I don't get any coaching in my job.
There you go.
Like, I'm just kind of left to do my own thing. And that's part of the reason why I'm open to making a change, is I want someone who's going to invest in me and my career and make me better. And so sure, the primary purpose of the role play is to see how they would perform and how do they think. But it's also to let them know that like, we want to coach you. We're going to give you feedback. Feedback is a gift. We'll do it in a constructive way. We're going to make you better. And that's why I think it's a good candidate experience for those that want to learn to be coached. Like they'll see that as a good thing. Yeah.
Because learning is not weakness, right? Like you talk about coachability. For me, one of the things that people miss with this sort of stuff is they just go like, well, is this person ready to take some feedback? And they go, right, let me give you some feedback. Rather than going, look, I'm going to give you some really brutal feedback now. Can I have your permission to do so? The outcome of that is that I help you to win, because what I'm looking to see is this, you know? And like, if you give people like a really clear, safe way of failing and they don't see learning as weakness and they don't take it as like a sort of, you know, a knock on their character or an ego hit, because you're going, we literally want you to win. Right. You know, do we have your permission to give you brutal feedback? Then it's a completely different thing. So I totally agree. What I was going to ask,
I like the way you frame that, by the way. That's a good way to tee it up. I'll be more receptive to your coaching.
I think it's true, right? Do I have your? Because if you ask for permission, you can basically say anything, right? You know, and no one in the history of the world says, "Can I give you some feedback?" And then the other person went, "Oh, please." You're always like, "Come on, then." But you're basically going to tell me that I went wrong, you know? Yeah. There's actually in the book Love and Work by Marcus Buckingham, he talks about, there's a whole chapter about how feedback is nonsense and about how feedback is just people telling you how they would like to do it. Like, here's how you should have done it. And what he says is that you should frame things by saying, rather than saying, I've got some feedback for you, you can say, could I make an observation about my perception of how that came across?
Okay, that's good. I like that framing.
What I read into that, like, here's how that felt to me.
Yeah.
So it's like, here's the reaction I had to it, rather than here's how you can go and do that things differently. And I think particularly you've grown sales teams massive, right? So when you're hiring across that sort of size of team, you've got so many different shapes and sizes of people and different characters and backgrounds and all these things that make this very diverse team. And where a lot of businesses get stuck is that they go, right, we hire people like us. Do you fit our culture? You know, and it's really like you're just hiring like you're just hiring mini-me's. And you get this like yes culture of all the same type of person, all yellow energy or red energy or whatever that manager likes, because they know it's safe. And if you're not like that, you get rejected by the culture, and you get these really horrible toxic cultures in that environment. But when you're like going, here's what we're trying to achieve, but if you've got a better way of doing that or a different way of doing that, we want to learn too. Like, we're here to learn.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I'm just wondering, what I would love to ask you is, you've done 100 of those scenarios. What's the most memorable?
Good question. I had one that comes to mind that didn't negotiate at all, but he was so effective at sticking to his list price of $100,000. Because normally I play pretty tough in this scenario, right? I'm a CXO and I grind them, and I'm able to get most people below $80,000. 80,000 is what gets them to President's Club in this scenario. It's the last day of the fiscal year, right? So it's their last deal that can get them to club. And I've had a lot of people make club on the last day or two of the fiscal year, right? Like it's a pretty realistic scenario. But yeah, one in particular stands out. Just didn't negotiate, but he sold value so well that I gave him the win at full list. So good for him.
Do you remember like a specific thing that you remember that made that so effective?
Yeah, so I would say it's almost binary. In the discovery, half the people ish do some level of quantification. They get a rough sense for the size of the problem that we're trying to solve. Those that do then have an advantage in the negotiation because they can say, "Oh, I understand our price is 50,000 more, but we had talked earlier about solving this $3 million problem or opportunity, and if our product is even slightly better than the competition, we're more likely to give you this $3 million outcome. And therefore the $50,000 premium is actually really small." Like, so when you frame it that way, I feel better about paying double. Double sounds terrible, but again, if it's a $50,000 gap to get a $3 million benefit, it's a great value in ROI. So I think in that one scenario, that person did a great job of reframing the value to price conversation to make me think differently about, paying double was actually, benefit to me.
Well, like my old CEO said, Brent, price is what you pay, value is what you get.
Love it. Yeah. Very, very well said. Yeah.
Amazing.
Let me share one more point on feedback, if I may, Richard. So certainly you want to assess the coachability and their reaction to the feedback, but I like to start by asking them for their own feedback, their own self-assessment. So at the end of the role play, we'll ask them first. And it's pretty interesting. I would say on average, the best candidates are the hardest on themselves. Like we'll ask them to give a 1 to 10 score and why. And the best ones will say, "Oh, it's like a 7. I know I could have done better here. And like almost in real time, they know where they could have been better. And sometimes it's the weak candidates that say, "Oh, I got a 9 because I got Bant," And so I would encourage you to ask them to do the self-assessment before you give your feedback.
I totally agree. Because I think that, when you talk about coachability, what does it really mean? It's growth mindset. And growth mindset starts with self-awareness. You can't possibly have a growth mindset if you're not self-aware. And I think that I talk about hiring being very simple, not easy, but simple. There's 4 types of people you can hire, and it's a mathematical equation. So I think you'll like it. Which is you have adders, subtractors, dividers, and multipliers. So adders and multipliers will grow your business. Dividers and subtractors will shrink your business in different ways and at different degrees. But adders are thinking about like, I've done the job, I've hit my target, work is done. That's like what work means to them. That's fine. You can have a bunch of those in your team. Don't make the managers adders, because they'll never hire people who are better than them, or they'll never get those people to become the best they could be. Multipliers want to be challenged. It's like, and I do agree, this thing from Steve Jobs where he said A players want to work with A players. Like it lifts everyone when you're working with someone that surprises everyone with the quality of thinking and work and output that they can do. When they're working with everyone else to multiply the impact, they are just driven to push themselves to completely new heights. Like you're not having to go right in their appraisal at the end of the quarter to be like, "Hey, so what do you want to aim for this year?" And they're like, "Just hit target again." They're going, "Right, I did 120 last year. This is about 150. Like they're always setting more ambitious goals. They're always asking you for that next step, always asking you for the promotion, always asking you for feedback, because in their mind, like the idea that they would be hitting a target and that's good enough doesn't even come into their mind.
It's a great framework. So you've got your questions built out to see which of those 4 types they fall into. Have you done any type of a regression afterwards to say, on average, when we assess people as a multiplier, the outcomes are whatever they are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've baked that into a thing called the multiplier hiring system. And what we're looking for is 4 characteristics that make a multiplier. So I've analyzed, I was trying to work out the numbers the other day, but because I don't come from a recruitment background, because I come from a sales leadership background, and I worked in a business for 12 years that scaled from 35 to 450 people around the world. And one of my major jobs was hiring in that environment. I must have, in my own teams, hired about 900 people. And then since pivoting into recruitment afterwards, probably another 200. So what are the patterns across all those things? And what I've realized is the multipliers are people who have 4 things very strong. And it spells out the word core. So it's the core 4 characteristics. They're collaborative. So they get results through others. People love working with them, customers and internally. They're not just about lone wolf. It's we are a collaborative team trying to achieve something bigger. The O is ownership. So they are intrapreneurs acting like owners within the business, taking that level of ownership. You never have to go, hey, guy, did you think about that? It's their baby. Like they take that much care and pride in their work. They act like owners. They think like founders. They take total ownership, unparalleled levels of ownership. The R is resourceful, particularly because we work at the earlier stage. You don't have all the resources of a massive brand. So your ability to go and take very limited resources and then go and find ways to win. Often you're competing against really large competitors in your space with way more resources, but you're so nimble and agile and innovative and creative that you come up with ways of solving problems. They're massive problem solvers who don't go, oh, that problem gets me stuck. They're like, that's a hurdle for us to overcome.
Yep.
And then the E is execution. Because everyone's hired someone who just wants to talk about strategy all day, work in spreadsheets all day, but doesn't want to actually go and execute and get stuff done. So the core four, collaborative, ownership, resourceful, execution. We've got a bunch of questions that we use to measure how someone has been in their past, how someone has been during the process, the present, and then how someone would be in the future. So there's a whole set of questions around, here's the business challenges we're facing. How would you think about solving that with us? And the people who display excellent CORE across past, present, and future will be multipliers in your business.
Fantastic framework. I love it. If you don't mind, I might take a page out of your book on this and add this to my hiring and recruiting framework.
100%.
A trend that I'm seeing that seems to separate the strongest reps from those who struggle is the ability to do value quantification or ROI. I see too many struggling reps who don't know how to have a comfortable conversation about the money and the financial impact. And on average, I think there's correlation between those who are good at building a business case, working with a champion to quantify not just value, but their unique value. That's another thing that I've seen as a trend as well, is some of these ROI calculators are fairly generic. And if it's generic, you're building a business case for your competition almost as much as you are for yourself. But if you can quantify the unique capabilities of your product or service, that's really where you can, not only win, but win at a higher value. So I just feel like that's an opportunity for a lot of these, especially startups, is to be able to quantify their value more efficiently.
Could you give an example?
Sure. So, for some of the clients that I work with, I help them build ROI calculators. I would recommend starting with feedback. Actually, I'll give you a great example. Recently, one of my clients, we built a draft ROI calculator, knowing that we may have missed the mark a little bit. And we did. We went back to their customers and we asked them, how do you quantify value? How did you quantify value when you bought our product? Because they were winning deals without winning or without building a business case. So we've refined it quite a bit. And now the feedback that we're getting from other customers and other prospects is really good. So it was like, yeah, this is hitting the mark. This is how we can quantify value. And the champions want it, right? They want help building a business case internally to go get the budget approved for this thing, whatever it is that you do. So, the cases are all over the place. So one of my clients in San Francisco is in the computerized maintenance and management software business, and the way that they quantify value is very different than, say, a research CRM platform. But either way, at the end of the day, it comes down to either increasing revenue or reducing cost or reducing risk or some combination thereof. Risk is a tricky one. It's harder to quantify, but still often very, very valid. But yeah, a lot of different ways to increase revenue, reduce cost, or both at the same time. And those that do it well, more likely to win and more likely to win at a higher value.
Such an interesting point. It reminds me, we just did a podcast with Gal Agger from Align. And it was really about hiring the top talent. And then the second thing was about why businesses fail to scale and move up market. And he talked about how people just assume that clients know how to buy.
Yeah.
And you don't make it easy. So his whole solution Aligned is about making it incredibly easy for buyers to have all the information in one place. So when they have that critical moment, when they go and take that business case forward, which could be like a 15-minute conversation, like you've run a 9-month deal, but in practical reality, that comes down to a 15-minute chat in amongst an agenda of other things with their boss. And if they don't nail that, then they'll get it wrong. And I'm just wondering, when you're talking about some salespeople aren't particularly great at quantifying that, as someone who's managed sales teams across all these different companies and at massive levels, what are some of those, what's your view of the practical reality of making that value quantified so it can be used by the buyer?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the product that you're selling, but I would say in most cases, we've actually done research on this. I think it was something along the lines of 80% of IT decisions or software decisions required some form of a quantified business case internally to get the economic buyer to sign off on it. So rough math to 80%. The percentage of software vendors doing the business case for their champion or their end user is far less than 80%. And therefore, what that means is, let's say the seller is helping 20% of the time. That extra 60% of the time, your champion is building their own internal business case. Now, to some degree, they have to, because salespeople are known for being aggressive with their ROI assumptions. But at least give them a framework that they can tweak to their own liking and maybe soften some of the expectations. But I think that's the gap, right? Like if 80% of the time it needs to happen, and you're doing it, will make up a number 20% of the time. You're leaving it to your rep to or your champion at your prospect to figure out how to build that business case. That's a missed opportunity.
I love it when there's statistics that so closely correlate with the amount of sales reps they're missing quota. It's like, 85% of managers are accidental and get no sales training. 84% of reps are missing quota. Correlation and causation. 80% of customers need to have the business case, but we're only doing it 20% of the time. I'm sure it just can't all be correlation, right?
Yeah, it's correlated. I don't know the exact math on it, but I certainly think it's correlated. The best reps are on average better. Actually, it comes out of, to some degree, the challenger sale, right? Yeah. They talk about teach, tailor, take control. And part of that is being comfortable with money and being able to build a business case. So, I think there's some research there that also, supports this point that we're making.
One thing I'd love to understand, Brent, is I know that we've had conversations about the books on my bookshelf, and I'd love to know, from your perspective, what's a book that's had like a massive impact on your career?
Okay, a lot of good ones there. From a sales management perspective, you've got The Qualified Sales Leader from John McMahon. Great book. The Godfather of Medic. It's great for reps too, by the way. It's more of a sales management book, but I think AEs can learn a lot from it as well. But I'd say that the book that had the most influence on my career when I was an individual contributor, this is 20 plus years ago, I was making a common mistake for new sales reps. I was single threading my deals, and I was very fortunate to have a coach and a mentor that I worked with. His name was Greg Carter, and he was able to see what I was doing and some of the mistakes that I was making, and he encouraged me to read Miller Heiman's Strategic Selling. It's been around a long time, but it's still very valid today. In fact, I think there's consultants that teach that methodology today. The blue sheets for those that are familiar with that methodology. But it's a great book for any complex sale to really understand all the various roles. Like, I remember thinking at the time, wow, this is a lot of work. I got to engage all of these different buying influences in different ways. But it's like, yeah, the alternative is you're not going to win, and you're going to have to do even more work to get to an outcome. So it's actually very efficient to follow this methodology. So yeah, I think it's very valid, for those that don't want to take the time to read the full book. I'm sure there's summaries on YouTube, but Miller Heiman, Strategic Selling, fantastic book. I still recommend it today to the up and coming sellers at some of the companies that I advise.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. And you mentioned The Qualified Sales Leader. I did a head of sales hiring project for a company in Toronto, and the founder said that he would like people to read that book as part of the process. So it's still going strong in terms of people's hiring criteria today. And remind me to introduce you to Ratchet Kataria, who we just did a podcast with last week. He's created a technology that literally gives you the relationship visibility across every single person that you've ever met in that account, as well as who you might know in terms of first line connections. So I think you might be a powerhouse together.
Love it.
Question, you've started a business. I know from my own journey, that's not just something that you do. I'm going to start a business one day and then you go and start. Like, what's the story of how this business came to be?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think in the back of my mind, I've always had this kind of goal to really try it. And about 20 years ago, I did an MBA program. I nearly set a record for the slowest MBA of all time at Santa Clara University because I was working a demanding startup job and, just one class per quarter. It took 5 years to get through that program. But along the way, we did a lot of weekend work and, project work and a lot of business plans. And I remember thinking, like, should there be like a website that has some pre-built templates for, these things that we're doing? Like, do we really have to do them from scratch? Like, yes, it's learning, but it's not the high value part. So long story short, I dabbled in entrepreneurship right after MBA program with one of my buddies from business school. And we created a small business called Spreadsheet Marketplace. And we were hopeful to create the eBay of spreadsheets where people could buy and sell templates. And what was cool about the business, over a couple of years, we had 4,000 customers worldwide. And we'd look at our Google Analytics dashboard, we'd see all these customers. Here's the problem. The average sales price was between $10 and $15. Not $10 and $15,000, but $10 and $15. So if you watch Shark Tank and Mr. Wonderful says, if after 3 years you have a business that's not making money, you don't have a business, you have a hobby. And we had a hobby, but it was a very, it was a part-time thing. It was interesting, but it doesn't really count, right? I was giving 80 hours a week to my full-time job. This is many years later. This is very different. Like, I'm all in. This is my business. I'm all in on trying to scale this go-to-market advisory plus ideal customer profile platform business. And I believe in it. I'm passionate about it. Whether or not it's going to be successful, of course, remains to be seen. But it's just totally different when you commit to something 110% as opposed to a small, part-time gig.
Yeah, burn the boats, right?
I'm sorry? Oh, burn the boats. Yeah, it's funny that you say that, actually, because Yella and I had talked about that phrase before. And sometimes you have to burn the boat. It doesn't mean burning a bridge, right? Let's be clear. It's not a negative thing. It just means fully commit, move forward and don't look back. So
yeah,
I love the phrase.
Exactly. It's really, I remember that moment with my own business of just going, I'm going to burn the boats here. Because I think when I started the business, I was like, I've got like 4 months cash runway to make this business work. And if not, I'll just get a job.
Yeah.
And like, obviously, I had to, it wasn't, if you look at this as a multi-threaded deal, I had my wife who was going, well, we've got to pay the mortgage. And she was also starting a business at the same time. So we lost both base salaries, and a base salary is this wonderful, warm, lovely drug that you get every month. And it feels so lovely. And if you take both of those away, then, I just remember like this dog walk one time. And I just said to my wife, I was like, I have to burn the boats. Like, there's no way this doesn't work. Yeah. It doesn't. And it even though it was my own business, I felt my level of ownership take a notch up. And it was a great moment and a great time. So I would encourage, if anyone is going to start a business, you can absolutely start part-time. But when you really go, right now, I've got a bit of traction, I'm going to do this thing, burn the boats.
Love it.
Because it will change how you think about problems, and you'll be so resourceful and you'll take so much ownership and you'll execute so hard and you'll work with whoever you need to work with, the core elements, that you will go and be successful. So Brent, another question I'd like to ask is, let's say that someone's listening to this full conversation and they're going, well, that sounds really interesting. I'd love to bring some more of this, blue energy and, the scientist mentality into my business and my go-to-market, so we can go and take better bets, have better calculated risks, and ultimately make our team more successful so we scale more efficiently.
Yeah.
What does your ICP look like? So what would an ideal customer be for you?
Yeah, I love the question. I need to eat my own dog food here, right? Or drink my own champagne, as they say. So I need to make sure I'm engaging with the right opportunity types that produce the right unit economics. To be determined, right? I don't have enough wins and losses yet to actually use my platform. Our platform, you really want like at least 100 wins and a couple hundred losses before you get statistical significance in the findings. With that said, I've got a hypothesis that says at least 5, preferably like 10 or more salespeople. There's enough opportunities there to really start to add meaningful value to the business. Up to about 100, maybe 200 sales reps. At that point, they're more likely to have the Moneyball team like we had at HP, bigger RevOps and data science teams. I'm fortunate to have a data science partner helping me in this business, who was our data science guy at Talend. Now, I think he joined when they were about 1,000 employees, but prior to that, they didn't really have, what we offer. So I think we're bringing the benefits of having a data science team without actually having to hire one or more full-time people to produce those insights.
Amazing. So if you're a founder who's got between 100 wins and 100 losses, then you'll have statistical significance to be able to go and like work out where you should place some bets next. And you don't have yet enterprise grade kind of RevOps in your
Exactly.
business.
I think that's the sweet spot in the middle where we can add a lot of value and help people get insights quickly. That's right.
Yeah, good man. And if someone wanted to get hold of you, Brent, to talk about how, just like maybe share a business problem with and get your perspective, what's the best way of them doing that?
Yeah, would love to engage. So I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. We also have SaaS Sales Advisors. That's the website where you can learn more about our business and the ICP platform.
Amazing. And if there was one thing that you wanted to leave in the brains of our listeners today in terms of a takeaway that you would like them to think about so they can move in this direction, what would that be?
Find the balance. You talked about art earlier, and I talked a lot about science, and I think there's a roughly equal balance in there. But I feel that most companies are underinvested in the science part of it. There's a lot of great free resources, on our website. Mark Roberge wrote The Science of Scaling. Like there's so much great content in there about how to apply math and science to your go-to-market plans. And so that's my encouragement is, be a little more data driven and figure out the scenarios that get you significantly better outcomes.
Amazing. Good man. Well, look, Brent, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Richard. I enjoyed it.
Perfect. Everyone else, we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation, we've got a newsletter called Growth Magnet on LinkedIn, where we take the best insights from all of these episodes and turn them into bite-sized format for you to enjoy.